Hey, all you cool cats and kittens, it's your favorite history teacher back at you again with another historical video. And today, we're going to talk about some sad times called the Great Depression. So let's get into it. It is a fairly short lecture, although there are a lot of notes. Again, you might have heard about it, you might have read about it, but now you're going to learn about it. The Great Depression, chapter 23. Hey, look at that. Only 9 more chapters to go. Oh, man. You need to know it. You just need to know it. Sorry. It's a lot, but I mean, it puts it into perspective. Okay, so during the 1920s, there's a term, an economic term referring the economy, a bull market as opposed to a bear market. And a bull market is where it is a very high, very profitable time. And so during the 1920s, there's an increase in stock prices. In 1928 to September 1929, stocks increased by 40%. 40%. Crazy money, like that GameStop money. And then you have it coming to a crashing halt. October 29th, 1929, referenced as Black Tuesday, and it's the significance of the stock market crashing here in America. And one of the main causes of the stock market crash is buying on margin. Now, this is where it's kind of like credit, but almost not. It's where you would buy a stock, say, a stock worth $200. You put 10% down. I don't know why stock would be that much. Just humor me. You put like 10, 15% down, and then you promise to pay it in full later. Well, a lot of people are doing this because, hey, I can buy $20 worth of stock, and all I got to do is put, what is that, 10% of 20? That's $2 down. Yeah, I'll do that. Give me $200 worth. I only got to put $10 down. Stuff like that. So you're not getting the money that you're actually paying for. You know what I'm saying? So, cause of the Great Depression, prosperity was based in a few industries. There was an unequal distribution of wealth. Almost half the families in America were living at or living below the poverty line, the subsistence level. Okay, credit was horrible during the 1920s. If you recall, farmers weren't really prosperous, right? They weren't. They were deep into debt. They wanted paper money. You can think back all the way to the Grange movement. Okay, back in the 1890s, farmers calling for more money to be printed to have the money supply. Well, they'd be screwed over by railroads and railroad rates, and their production. Remember, from the last lecture, they kept producing at World War I levels, and that's only going to lower prices, and production outweighed demand. And there are high protective tariffs, which kind of hurt farmers because their industries here are putting high tariffs for European countries to buy from U.S. stuff, and that only going to make European countries and others put high tariffs on their stuff. So now if farmers who need to sell their grain abroad can't do it because of these high tariffs, and they're stuck with the product. They're stuck with their crop. Okay, you have something called the Dawes Plan. It wasn't a cause of the Great Depression, but this is the way the American government step in to help the German government fix itself following World War I. If you had me last year in world history, you already know this. But it's the way that the German government paid back the Weimar Republic paid their why can't I think of it? Paid their reparation payments. So the U.S. banks will loan money to Germany, who Germany will then pay reparation payments to Britain and France thanks to the Treaty of Versailles. And then Britain and France will turn around and pay the U.S. government, the U.S. Treasury Department, for their loans for the money that they borrowed during the war. So it's just a big circle of money, and that kind of ends with the stock market crash. And there's an immediate bank crisis. 9,000 banks will close in America from 1930 to 1933. 1933, hardest year, probably the toughest year during the Depression, 1933. And the money supply decreased by 1/3, so there's not that much money to go around in circulation. Okay, here you got banks crowding to banks, trying to pull out all their money. Remember I told you, I don't know if you remember this, but banks don't have all the money that their customers have in the bank. They might have, I don't know. Let's just say they don't have $100 million to give out. All right. They probably carry maybe at this time, maybe $1 million. And, people are trying to pull their money out. And the more and more money pulled out, the banks will close because, hey, they got no money. So if you had loans with banks or vice versa, you were hit hard. And here's the Dow Jones, 1929. Stock market, plummeting. Okay, the American people in hard times, the industrial North was hit hard. Ohio, for instance, Ohio unemployment was about 50%. Half of the Ohio population was unemployed. Many Americans associated unemployment with failure. This kind of masculine idea, this ego that if you can't provide for your family, you were seen as a failure as a family man, as a husband, as a father, as a son. So charities and other relief organizations just couldn't keep up the pace, trying to help provide some relief, soup kitchens and all that. And then you have something called the Dust Bowl that happens in conjunction with the Great Depression out in the Midwest. So if you can think from eastern Colorado to Missouri and from Texas to North Dakota, there is a big fat drought. This is called Tornado Alley, and over cultivation of crops, again, wheat, and leaving the soil dry and arid. Not, crop. They're not fans of crop rotation out there, and this drought is going to hit farmers so hard. So you have this book, this novel written by John Steinbeck called The Grapes of Wrath, and it is a story about the Dust Bowl, about these Okies that have to migrate to California. You have black blizzards or dust storms, again, Tornado Alley. All these dust storms would, since the soil is so dry and dead, these massive windstorms sweep through, picking up the topsoil, which is the soil you need, picking up the topsoil and just depleting these fields and carrying dust all across the Midwest. And then, like I said, Okies are farmers that had to move from the Dust Bowl areas to California, packing up everything they got. They're called Okies. Most of them come from Oklahoma. So here's John Steinbeck. Here's the soup kitchen. As you see, it's a long, long line, like trying to get into Trader Joe's during quarantine. You know what I'm saying? That's a sad. That's not a good comparison. Here's a black blizzard coming in, and here's what will be left after a dust storm. And this is like your, you know, this is like a wagon. This is an automobile Model T. I don't know. And look how high that is. That's like almost 3-4 feet high, just of dust. Ugh. If you think about it, your dead skin particles, dust. Anyways, more African Americans were especially hit hard. For over half the population in the South was unemployed, and they still had to deal with segregation and discrimination. Okay, and then you have what's something called the Scottsboro case, where 9 African American males were accused of rape. An all-white jury found them guilty. 8 of them were sentenced to death. However, they would all be released eventually from jail, though many years later, and they were falsely accused of raping a white woman, and they would be, I think, released in like the early 1950s. Extra credit. Well, extra credit. Extra. Read all about it. When were the 9 African Americans eventually released? And yeah, find that out for me. When? Other minorities weren't doing so hot as well. You got Mexican Americans, 2 million people of Mexican descent living in the Southwest, and they were mostly farmers. And they're either going to go out to California or go back to Mexico, and some were forced out. Asian Americans, they fought to have laws protecting the Japanese from discrimination. It's not really going to pan out well for them. Women received pressure from their husbands not to work, especially if the husband needed work. Women were kind of discouraged to go to work anymore. And you got to stay home, honey. So many minorities will not benefit from relief programs, and we'll see that in the New Deal in the next chapter. And marriage and birth rates sharply declined during the Great Depression. Not a good time to have a wedding. That's all I got to say. So some arts during the Depression. You have Dorothea Lange. Need to know her. Famous photographer. She photographed just not mind-boggling, jaw-dropping realism photos of families that were hit hard by the Great Depression. And also John Steinbeck writing novels about, his novel, The Grapes of Wrath, focusing on stories from the Dust Bowl. You have radio, everyone during this time every family has a radio as a source of entertainment. Well, FDR is going to take advantage of this using his fireside chats when he gets elected president. And this is also where soap operas, plays, and news would be broadcasted. You also have the Spanish Civil War from 1936 to 1939. We kind of talked about this last year in world history. Some Americans supported the Republican government, but the fascist government led by General Francisco Franco had the support of Hitler and the Big Moose, Mussolini. So here's the famous photo. You've probably seen this before. It's of a woman and her children. I think, is she holding a baby? I don't know if she's holding a baby, but I think she is. That might be a baby. But these are her other 2 kids. And just look at the face of despair, man. Sad. And here's FDR. Okay, the unhappy presidency of Herbert Hoover. So Herbert Humphrey Hoover becomes president 1929, and 7 months into his presidency, he has to deal with this. He urged volunteerism, kind of similar to what he did during World War I when he was helping promote rationing during World War I. He's going to have that same mentality, like, well, you guys don't. We shouldn't eat meat on Thursdays or Saturdays. Okay, we need to cut back. And he feared deficit spending. What is deficit spending? That is knowingly running up a debt. Where you're spending more money than you actually have. And that's kind of what, I mean, I'm not saying this is what starts deficit spending, but we are a deficit spending style American government. That's why our debt is, what was it, $16 trillion in debt? Okay. We borrow a lot of money. Okay. You have something called the Hawley-Smoot tariff, which is a high protective tariff, which will lead to European tariffs in return, kind of like that trade piece I talked about that hurt farmers, these high tariff rates. And that's only going to discourage trade among European and American companies to trade with each other. You have something called Hoovervilles, which are neighborhoods named for shanty towns, these little tin roof sheds that will be built because people lose their homes to the banks and foreclosures, and they got nowhere else to go. So they build these little shacks where their families would live. You have the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which was meant to provide loans to banks, railroads, RRs, railroads, and other businesses. It's largely a failure because they never provided enough money. And of course, that's going to be true because the money supply is cut by a third. You have a third less money to go around. Here's Hawley and Smoot on the left, and here's a shantytown picture. You know, you got kids, you know, dressed in tatters. You got this shack hodgepodge. It's a sad time, people. Sad time. Continuing on, World War I veterans were also hit hard with the Great Depression because they were promised these bonuses to be paid at a future date after World War I was over. Well, it's been some time. They want their money. So they're called the Bonus Expeditionary Force or the Bonus Army. And these unhappy World War I veterans descend upon D.C. and march on Washington, hoping to demand for their bonus payments now. Well, if they were smart, the government don't got that money. So they're gonna set up Hoovervilles around the Capitol. And Hoover will eventually order the army led by future OG Douglas MacArthur to break up the bonus army. It's going to be a little violent. The bonus army will finally leave the Capitol, and that's going to hurt Hoover's presidency even more because, hey, you just used the army to like break up our veterans. Imagine if that happened today. Please. Yeah, any president would have their ego, they would just be seen as a negative Nancy. Okay, you have the election of 1932. Hoover runs for re-election. And then you have Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the New York governor, running at this time. And he wins on a landslide, pledging his New Deal programs for Americans. He promised them, you guys need a New Deal because you got a raw one under this past president. So FDR was inaugurated March 4th, 1933, in the midst of a huge banking crisis. And this is the last time a president will be inaugurated in March. They pushed it up to January. That's why presidents get inaugurated on January 20th every 4 years. So there you go. Here is some bonus armies clashes with the Army in Washington, D.C. And here you have Hoover on the right, FDR on the left. And that concludes. So, yeah, short chapter, but a lot of information. You might see a DBQ about the Great Depression or an SAQ about the Great Depression. So this is some background information that you just need to know. All right. So yeah, that was pretty short, fairly short. So hopefully you enjoyed how short this was. If you like that sad Great Depression lecture, smash that like button. And as always, stay safe, wash your hands. Peace.